There was a time when I thought I had everything I could ever want. A successful career, a beautiful home, and, most importantly, a wife I adored. 11 years of marriage had only strengthened what I believed to be an unshakable bond. Emma and I had built a life together, one that seemed almost enviable from the outside. We met 14 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday party, a night I still remember vividly. She had walked into the room with the kind of presence that turned heads effortlessly, though she never sought attention. It was simply the way she was, self-assured, magnetic. I was captivated from the first moment, drawn to the way she spoke, the way she laughed. We spent hours talking that night, and by the end of it, I knew she was different from anyone I had ever met. Our relationship moved quickly, but it never felt rushed. We fell into step with each other naturally, as if we had always belonged together. When we got married 3 years later, it felt like the easiest decision I had ever made. We weren't just husband and wife. We were best friends, partners in everything. Our life together was, for the most part, uncomplicated. We had chosen not to have children, a decision we both felt confident in. It gave us the freedom to travel often, to experience life without the weight of obligations beyond ourselves. Our home was filled with laughter, with the scent of morning coffee, with the quiet hum of contentment that comes from truly enjoying someone's presence. Emma worked as a freelance photographer, a career that suited her adventurous nature. She had an eye for capturing moments, for finding beauty in the simplest of things. Sometimes she would be gone for hours, lost in her work, returning home with a satisfied glow and stories about the places she had been. I loved that about her. The way she found wonder in the world, the way she made even the most mundane moments feel special. I, on the other hand, had a more structured life. My job in finance required long hours and discipline, but I didn't mind. I had always been the type who found comfort in routine, and Emma understood that. We balanced each other in ways that made sense, in ways that felt right. Even after over a decade together, we still made time for each other. Friday nights were always ours. Dinners at our favorite restaurant, long drives with no destination, quiet evenings curled up on the couch. Weekends were spent exploring new places, indulging in shared hobbies. We never let life become stagnant, and that, I believed, was the key to our happiness. If someone had asked me then what I thought of marriage, I would have said it was the best decision I had ever made. I would have told them that Emma and I were solid, that we understood each other in a way that needed no explanation. I had no reason to think otherwise. At least, not yet. Marriage, in many ways, is about rhythm. The way two people fall into step with each other, moving through life in a shared pattern. Some couples struggle to find that rhythm, but for Emma and me, it always felt effortless. We had our routines, small traditions that made up the fabric of our life together. Mornings began with coffee on the back patio, Emma wrapped in a blanket, watching the world wake up, while I scrolled through emails, half listening as she pointed out birds in the trees or the way the sunlight hit the garden. Evenings were slower, filled with the warmth of home-cooked meals, soft music playing in the background, and conversations about our day. Work kept me busy, often pulling me into long hours at the office, but I always made sure to be present when I was home. Emma, on the other hand, had a more flexible schedule. Some days, she would be out before I even left for work, camera in hand, chasing the perfect shot. Other days, she would be home when I returned, stretched out on the couch editing photos, a glass of wine beside her. It was a rhythm that worked for us. We complemented each other in ways that made life easy. I was structured, methodical in the way I approached things. Emma was spontaneous, the type of person who would wake up one morning and decide she wanted to drive to the coast just to watch the waves. She kept me from getting too rigid, and I gave her a sense of stability. Our marriage wasn't perfect. No relationship ever is, but it was strong. We had disagreements like any couple, moments where our differences clashed, but they never lasted. Neither of us were the type to hold grudges, and we always made it a point to talk things through before they could fester. I had never been one to raise my voice, and Emma had never been one to walk away from a conversation unfinished. It was one of the things I loved about us. Our love had changed over the years, of course. The intoxicating rush of the early days had softened into something steadier, something deeper. We knew each other's habits, each other's quirks. I knew that Emma hated when people interrupted her while she was reading, that she could never fall asleep without a fan on, that she always double-checked the locks before bed, even though I had already done it. She knew that I liked my coffee black, that I hummed under my breath when I was deep in thought, that I never liked leaving a task unfinished. We fit together. That was the only way to describe it. On weekends, we made it a point to get out of the house. Sometimes it was a short hike, sometimes a drive to a town we had never been to before. Emma loved finding small antique shops, wandering through aisles of forgotten things, and wondering about the stories behind them. I wasn't as fascinated by them as she was, but I went anyway, because I loved watching her get excited over the smallest discoveries. Looking back, I can see that I took a lot of those moments for granted. Not because I didn't appreciate them, but because I believed they would always be there. I believed that we would always be there. But life has a way of changing when you least expect it. If love was a grand, sweeping novel, then marriage was written in the details, the little things that made up a life together. The way Emma would squeeze my hand 3 times to say, "I love you," without words. The way I would always tilt my umbrella slightly toward her when we walked in the rain, even if it meant getting my own shoulder wet. It was in the everyday things, the moments so small they barely seemed worth noticing. The way she stole the blankets at night, but always draped them back over me in the morning. The way she left handwritten notes in my work bag, little reminders to eat lunch, or a joke about something we had laughed about the night before. The way she tapped her fingers against the steering wheel in time with whatever song was playing, completely lost in the music. Our marriage was full of these moments, these small habits that built a life. And that life felt good, steady, real. We weren't the kind of couple that needed grand gestures to prove our love. We didn't do extravagant gifts or big surprises. Instead, it was the quiet things. The way Emma would bring me a cup of coffee without me asking. The way I would hold her just a little longer on the mornings when she wasn't quite ready to get out of bed. Some nights, we would sit in the living room with a bottle of wine and talk for hours. About the future, about places we wanted to visit, about things we had read or seen that had stuck with us. Emma had this way of making everything feel interesting, like the most ordinary conversation was somehow special just because she was the one having it. We traveled often, though not always far. Sometimes, it was just a weekend trip to the countryside, staying in a quiet bed and breakfast where Emma could take photos of the morning fog rolling over the hills. Other times, we would go somewhere completely new, wandering through unfamiliar streets with no real plan. She loved capturing moments, freezing them in time, while I simply enjoyed being there with her. Our home was filled with her photographs, landscapes from places we had visited, candid shots of people we had met along the way. Each one told a story, and she loved telling them. I would listen, fascinated not just by the images, but by the way she spoke about them, the passion in her voice. Photography wasn't just her career, it was a part of who she was. I was proud of her. Always. She had this ability to turn the simplest things into something beautiful. She made life feel lighter, made everything seem a little less serious. If I had any complaints, they were small. The way she sometimes lost track of time when she was working, how I'd have to remind her to eat because she got so caught up in editing photos. The way she could get lost in her own world, leaving me feeling like an observer instead of a participant. But those were just small things, little quirks that I had come to accept. We were happy. At least, I thought we were. And then, without warning, everything changed. Looking back, I wonder when it really started. Was it a single moment, a turning point so small I missed it? Or was it something that happened gradually, slipping between the cracks of our daily life until, one day, it was just there? At the time, I didn't notice. Not really. Life was busy, as it always had been. I worked long hours, sometimes staying late to finish projects, and Emma's photography had started taking off in new ways. She was busier than ever, always running to meet clients, working on new edits late into the night. I was happy for her. I knew how much she loved what she did, and I had always supported her ambition. But then, there were the changes. Small, almost imperceptible at first. It started with her phone. Emma had never been secretive about it before. She used to leave it lying around without a second thought, sometimes even asking me to check messages for her when she was busy. But one evening, as I walked past her in the kitchen, I saw her screen light up with a notification. She grabbed the phone quickly, tilting it away from me as she typed a response. It was such a small thing, something I normally wouldn't have thought twice about. But the way she reacted, almost instinctively, felt off. Then there were the nights out. She had always loved going out with friends, but lately, it had become more frequent. At first, she would invite me along, but then, gradually, she stopped. "It's just a girls' night," she'd say with a smile, pressing a quick kiss to my cheek before heading out the door. At first, I believed her. Why wouldn't I? But the thing that unsettled me wasn't just that she was going out. It was that she was different when she came home. The way she smelled, faint traces of cologne that weren't mine. The way she would be on her phone late at night, her fingers moving quickly over the screen, smiling at something she never shared with me. The way she started dressing differently, not just for work, but for these nights out. Clothes I hadn't seen before, perfume I didn't recognize. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was overthinking, but the shifts continued. She started staying out later, sometimes not coming home until well past midnight. She would say she had been with friends, but she never mentioned who. If I asked, she would get irritated, brushing it off as if I was being controlling. I didn't want to be that husband, the one who monitored his wife's every move, who assumed the worst at the first sign of change. But something wasn't right. One night, as we lay in bed, I reached for her like I always had. She turned away. "I'm just tired," she murmured. And for the first time in 11 years, I felt something shift between us. A wall I hadn't realized was there until I reached for her and found only distance. I didn't know it then, but I had already lost her. The changes in Emma's behavior weren't just passing phases. They were becoming patterns. At first, I convinced myself they were harmless, just a part of life shifting as we both got older, but the more I paid attention, the harder it became to ignore. She had always been someone who lived in the moment, but lately, she seemed distant even when she was right in front of me. Conversations that used to flow easily now felt forced, as if she was only half listening, her mind occupied with something or someone else. When I spoke, she would nod absent-mindedly, her eyes flicking to her phone or glancing at the clock as if she had somewhere better to be. The late nights became more frequent, and when she did come home, she had excuses ready before I even asked. There was always some reason: a delayed photo shoot, a last-minute dinner with friends, a networking event she had forgotten to mention. I wanted to believe her, but the explanations never seemed to match the way she acted. She had become guarded, more careful with her words, and there was a nervous energy in her that hadn't been there before. I started paying attention to the details, the little things that didn't add up. She had changed her phone password, something she had never felt the need to do in all our years together. It wasn't as if I made a habit of checking her messages, but knowing I suddenly couldn't made me uneasy. One night, when she had left her phone on the coffee table and stepped out of the room, I glanced at the screen as a notification popped up. It was just a name I didn't recognize, no message preview, but the way she snatched it up the moment she returned made my stomach tighten. She saw me looking and gave a quick, forced laugh. "Just work stuff," she muttered before slipping the phone into her pocket. Emma had always loved taking photos, but now it felt like an excuse, a shield to justify long absences and unpredictable schedules. Her shoots used to be well-planned, with detailed itineraries and set locations, but now she was vague, unable to give clear answers about where she had been or who she had been with. When I asked how her shoots went, she would smile too easily and give me generic responses, brushing off the details as if they didn't matter. Then there were the clothes. I had never been the type of husband to police what my wife wore, but I noticed when she started buying things she wouldn't have worn before. The dresses were tighter, the heels higher, the makeup a little more carefully applied. At first, I told myself it was just a phase, that she was experimenting with her style, but something about it felt off. Emma had always been effortlessly beautiful, never the type to spend too much time getting ready unless we were going somewhere special. Now, she was dressing up for nights I wasn't invited to, putting effort into looking good for people I had never met. One evening, as I was putting away laundry, I found a receipt in the pocket of one of her jackets. It was from a bar downtown, a place we had never been together. 2 drinks, nothing outrageous, but it was dated for a night when she had told me she was at a friend's house. I stared at the slip of paper for a long time, my mind racing through all the possibilities. Maybe she had just stopped for a drink before heading home. Maybe she had met up with a friend last minute and forgotten to mention it. But if that was the case, why had she lied? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, But doubt had settled in my mind, and once it was there, I couldn't shake it. I had never considered myself a jealous or paranoid man, but something in my gut was telling me that this wasn't just my imagination. Something was wrong. I just didn't know what. Not yet. Doubt has a way of creeping into your mind and settling there like an unwelcome guest. Once it arrives, it refuses to leave, feeding off every unanswered question, every inconsistency, every nagging thought that tells you something isn't right. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself that I was being paranoid, that Emma was simply going through a phase, but the more I watched, the more I saw. She was on her phone constantly now, but never in a way that seemed casual. She used to scroll mindlessly through social media, showing me posts that made her laugh or sharing bits of gossip about people we knew. Now, she was more secretive. She kept her phone on silent, face down on the table, and never left it unattended for long. If I walked into the room while she was texting, she would lock the screen quickly, flashing me a strained smile as if nothing was out of the ordinary. If I asked who she had been talking to, her answers were always the same. Just a friend, just a client, just work. Then there were the disappearances. At first, they were small. Running late from a shoot, stopping by a friend's house, errands that took longer than expected. But soon, they became more frequent, more unpredictable. One Saturday, she told me she was meeting a client for a consultation and would be home by dinner. She didn't come home until after midnight. When I asked where she had been, she sighed as if exhausted by the question. The shoot ran late, she said, pulling off her earrings and tossing them onto the dresser. It took longer than I thought. I stared at her, searching for some sign that she was lying, but her expression was unreadable. Something inside me twisted painfully, but I forced myself to nod. Okay, I said, because what else was I supposed to do? Call her a liar without proof? Demand answers I wasn't sure I wanted? But the next morning, as she slept beside me, I found the dress she had worn the night before draped over the chair in our bedroom. The faintest trace of cologne clung to the fabric. It wasn't hers, and it wasn't mine. My mind was a battlefield now, warring between logic and fear. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe I was seeing things that weren't there. But a part of me, the part that had always trusted her without hesitation, was beginning to crumble. I started noticing other things, small details that piled on top of each other until they became impossible to ignore. She wasn't just coming home late. She was avoiding me. The way she used to curl up beside me on the couch, resting her head on my shoulder, had disappeared. She was distant now, preoccupied, as if her mind was somewhere else entirely. One evening, as she stood in front of the mirror adjusting an earring, I caught a glimpse of something I hadn't seen in years. A spark, a glow. It was the way she used to look before our date nights, before special occasions, before moments that had once belonged to us. Except this time, she wasn't looking at me that way. She was getting ready to leave, slipping on a pair of heels she hadn't worn in years, applying lipstick with careful precision. I stood in the doorway, watching her, feeling like an intruder in my own home. "Where are you going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She met my gaze in the mirror, her expression perfectly composed. "Out with friends," she said simply. "I won't be too late." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to tell myself that this was just another night, that I was imagining the way her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her clutch, the way she avoided my eyes as she stepped past me. But as she walked out the door, a thought struck me so hard it left me breathless. She wasn't just slipping away from me. She was already gone. Suspicion had turned into obsession. Every lie Emma told, every inconsistency in her stories, every moment of distance between us felt like another crack in the foundation of our marriage. I had spent weeks trying to convince myself that I was being paranoid, that I was overanalyzing things that didn't matter, but the truth was becoming harder to deny. She was hiding something, and whatever it was, it had already taken her away from me. She was careful, but not careful enough. I started noticing things she didn't bother covering up. The scent of cologne on her clothes when she came home late. The way she tucked her phone under her pillow at night instead of leaving it on the nightstand like she used to. The missing pieces in her stories, telling me she was at a friend's house, only for me to notice the untouched leftovers in the fridge that she should have eaten for dinner. Her late nights became more frequent, and so did the excuses. She was working late. She was out with friends. She was meeting clients. The words spilled from her lips so easily now, without hesitation, without any of the warmth she used to have when she shared the details of her day with me. I stopped asking questions, not because I believed her, but because I already knew I wouldn't get the truth. One night, she came home later than usual, her hair slightly disheveled, her lipstick smudged in a way that didn't look accidental. She barely even looked at me as she kicked off her heels and walked past me toward the bedroom. I sat on the couch, watching her, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I wanted to say something, to demand answers, to make her admit what I already knew in my gut. But the words wouldn't come. What was the point? She would lie. She would twist the truth. She would make me feel like the paranoid, insecure husband while she kept doing whatever the hell she was doing. Instead, I stayed up late, alone, staring at the ceiling as the weight of it all pressed down on me. Sleep felt impossible. My mind wouldn't stop replaying every moment, every clue I had ignored, every time I had convinced myself that this was all in my head. But it wasn't in my head. I knew that now. The next morning, I made a decision. I needed proof. Real proof. Something undeniable. Because when the time came, I wanted to be ready. I wanted to make sure there was nothing she could say, no lie she could tell, no excuse she could come up with. And that was the moment I decided to start looking. I didn't know what I was expecting to find. A suspicious text, a hidden message, a second phone, something. But as I started searching, I had no idea that what I was about to uncover would be so much worse than anything I had imagined. Doubt had consumed me for weeks, but the moment I decided to search for proof, it felt like something inside me had already shifted. I wasn't hoping to be wrong anymore. I wasn't looking for reassurance. I was looking for the truth, no matter how ugly it was. I needed to see it with my own eyes, to strip away the lies and expose whatever Emma had been hiding from me. I started with the obvious, her phone, but she was too careful. It was always locked, always within reach, as if she knew I might try to look. Her messages were cleared out regularly, her call logs wiped after every night she came home late. There was nothing there, but I knew better than to stop searching. People like Emma, people who thought they were smarter than everyone else, always left something behind. It wasn't until I sat down at her laptop that I found it. Emma had always been protective of her computer, but she had never needed to hide it from me before. I knew her password. She had never changed it. I told myself that if I didn't find anything suspicious, I would stop looking. That if I opened her laptop and found nothing, I would walk away and never speak of this again. But deep down, I already knew that wouldn't happen. The moment I was in, I went straight to her files. Most of them were exactly what I expected: photo albums, client work, invoices, normal things. But then I saw it. A folder tucked away, hidden among old documents that hadn't been opened in years. It was named something harmless, something forgettable, as if she had tried to disguise it as an unimportant file. My pulse pounded as I clicked on it. Inside were dozens of videos. At first, I hesitated. My mind was racing, grasping for an explanation before I even pressed play. Maybe they were work-related. Maybe they were recordings from some project she hadn't told me about. But the second I clicked on the first video, every shred of hope I had left shattered into pieces. The screen lit up with an image of Emma, my wife, the woman I had loved for over a decade, laying on a hotel bed, dressed in nothing but lingerie. I barely had time to process it before the camera shifted, and then I saw him. I didn't recognize his face, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter who he was. All that mattered was what they were doing. The next video was worse, and the one after that. I don't know how many I watched before I stopped feeling anything at all. The sounds of her laughter, her moans, the way she looked at him, like she had once looked at me, played on a loop, stabbing me over and over until I was numb. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times in my head, wondered how I would react if I ever found undeniable proof of her betrayal. Would I scream? Would I break something? Would I cry? But in the end, I did none of those things. I just sat there, staring at the screen, feeling the last 11 years of my life unraveling in front of me. When I finally closed the laptop, my hands were steady. My heart wasn't racing anymore. The anger, the devastation, the heartbreak, it was all still there, but something else had settled in its place. A cold, unwavering clarity. She thought she had gotten away with it. She thought I would never find out. She was wrong. And now, I was going to make sure she lost everything. The moment I closed the laptop, I knew what had to be done. There was no going back. No conversation, no confrontation, no second chances. Emma had made her choice a long time ago, and now, I was making mine. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to break down. I wasn't going to beg her for an explanation. What I was going to do was destroy her. I spent the next few hours in a state of eerie calm, moving with a quiet efficiency that surprised even me. I copied everything. The videos, the messages I found buried in her emails, the proof of her reservations at hotels she never mentioned. I backed them up onto a separate drive, ensuring that no matter what happened, I would have everything I needed. She had been meticulous in hiding her tracks, but she hadn't been careful enough. She thought she was smarter than me, but she had made a critical mistake. She had underestimated me. The house we had built together, the life we had shared, no longer felt like mine. It was just a place where a betrayal had unfolded, brick by brick, behind my back. And now, it was time for her to lose all of it. First, I called my lawyer. The moment I laid everything out, there was no hesitation in his voice. With the evidence I had gathered, the divorce would be swift and brutal. I had always been fair, always believed that marriage was a partnership, but that generosity ended now. She was going to leave this marriage with nothing. No house, no savings, no security. She had gambled with our life, and she was about to see what it felt like to lose. Next, I started packing. Not my things, hers. I moved through the house methodically, stripping it of every trace of her existence. Clothes, shoes, jewelry, everything she had ever brought into this home was thrown into garbage bags. The gifts I had bought her, the framed photos of us smiling like fools, the sentimental trinkets she had scattered around the house. I tossed them all into a pile. She didn't deserve to have any of it. By the time I was done, the house felt lighter. Empty, but in a way that felt liberating rather than sad. I wasn't the one leaving. She was. And when she walked through that door, expecting to come home to the life she had so carelessly tainted, she was going to find out just how badly she had miscalculated. I didn't bother texting or calling her. I didn't need to. I wanted her to walk in unsuspecting, thinking everything was still under her control, only to watch her world crumble in real time. So I sat down. I poured myself a drink. And I waited. Emma had no idea what was waiting for her. But she would soon. And it was going to be the last surprise she ever got from me. I heard her car pull into the driveway just past midnight. The engine idled for a moment before shutting off, and then there was silence. I imagined her checking her reflection in the mirror, fixing her hair, maybe even glancing at her phone to send one last message to him before stepping inside. She had no idea what was waiting for her on the other side of the door. The lock clicked, and Emma stepped inside, heels tapping against the floor as she moved through the dimly lit house. She didn't notice the changes right away. She set her purse on the table like she always did, kicked off her shoes, and exhaled as if relieved to finally be home. Then, she looked up. The house was stripped of her. Her clothes, her belongings, the framed pictures of us that once decorated the walls, gone. In their place were the garbage bags, stuffed with everything she had ever brought into this home. The suitcase sat near the door, packed and ready for her departure. Her eyes moved from the pile to where I was sitting in the living room, waiting. For the first time in weeks, she truly looked at me. And she knew. Her breath hitched, her body going rigid as if she could stop time by refusing to move. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice tight. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to watch her squirm, to let the weight of the moment settle before I shattered her world completely. I reached for my laptop, already open to the folder I had discovered earlier. I didn't say anything as I turned the screen toward her, pressing play. The room filled with the sound of her own betrayal. Her laughter, her moans, the sight of her tangled in bedsheets that weren't ours, touching a man who wasn't me. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might collapse. For the first time in all these weeks, she had no lies ready. No excuses, no half-truths, no rehearsed dismissals. She simply stood there, frozen, watching her own undoing unfold in front of her. How long? My voice was calm, colder than I had ever heard it. Her lips parted, but no words came out. "How long, Emma?" I asked again, this time sharper. Her hands trembled as she reached out, as if she could somehow stop the video from playing, as if she could erase what I had already seen. She started, but her voice cracked. It's not. Don't. I cut her off before she could finish whatever pathetic lie she was about to spew. I don't want to hear it. I closed the laptop, the silence that followed feeling heavier than the noise. I want you out. Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing. Not sympathy, not pain, not even anger anymore. Just the deep, hollow satisfaction of knowing that I was in control now, and she had lost. Please, she whispered, taking a shaky step toward me. We can talk about this. We can fix it. I laughed, a cold, bitter sound. Fix it? I gestured toward the laptop. Do you even realize how pathetic you sound right now? You didn't just cheat, Emma. You recorded it. You kept memories of it. And you thought I would never find out? Her tears fell then, a desperate, broken sob escaping her lips as she dropped to her knees, hands covering her face. It was a performance, one I had no interest in watching. I made a mistake, she choked out. I wasn't thinking. No, I interrupted, standing up. A mistake is forgetting to turn off the stove. A mistake is buying the wrong brand of coffee. This was a choice. Repeatedly, over and over, behind my back, with no regard for me, for our marriage, for the life we built. And now you're going to live with the consequences. She reached for me, but I stepped back. I'm sorry, she cried. You're not sorry, I said. You're just sorry you got caught. I moved past her, grabbed her suitcase, and hauled it toward the door. You're leaving tonight. Where am I supposed to go? Her voice was barely a whisper. I don't care. I yanked the door open. That's not my problem anymore. For a long moment, she just sat there, broken, as if she truly hadn't considered that this would be the outcome, as if she had believed she could come home, lie her way through this, and somehow keep the life she had destroyed. But there was nothing left for her here. Slowly, she rose to her feet, wiping her face as if that would somehow erase what she had done. She looked at me one last time, her expression pleading, but I didn't waver. She had already taken enough from me. She grabbed the suitcase and walked to the door. When she stepped outside, I didn't wait for her to turn around. I didn't wait for her to beg one last time. I simply shut the door behind her, locking it, sealing her out of my life for good. And for the first time in weeks, I felt free. The house was silent after she left. No more late-night whispers, no more soft footsteps padding through the hallway, no more forced laughter masking the lies. Just silence. And for the first time in a long time, I welcomed it. I sat on the couch for a while, staring at the door, half expecting Emma to come knocking, begging for another chance, swearing that this wasn't really the end. But she didn't. Maybe she knew there was nothing left to salvage. Maybe she was too ashamed to try. Or maybe she had somewhere else to go, someone else to run to now that she had nowhere to hide. It didn't matter. She was out of my life. That was all I needed. The next morning, I went through the final steps of making sure she stayed out. The locks were changed, the divorce papers were filed, and the evidence I had gathered was safely in my lawyer's hands. With the proof of her infidelity, the legal process would be swift and absolute. She wouldn't get a dime. Not a piece of the home we built together. Not a single thing from our shared life. She had already taken enough from me. My trust, my love, my time. I wasn't about to let her take anything else. I blocked her number, deleted every picture of her from my phone, and scrubbed every trace of her from my life. There was no point in keeping anything that reminded me of what we used to have. That person, the woman I thought I had married, was gone. And if I was honest with myself, maybe she had been gone long before I ever found out. I had just been too blind to see it. Days turned into weeks, and the weight on my chest began to lift. I didn't have to wonder where she was, didn't have to analyze every late-night excuse, didn't have to feel like a stranger in my own home. I went back to the routines I had abandoned. The gym, work, reconnecting with friends I had neglected during the slow collapse of my marriage. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Not a husband trying to hold on to something that was already gone. Just me. I heard about her once, through mutual acquaintances. She was struggling, living in a small apartment across town, trying to pick up the pieces of the life she had destroyed. I could have felt sorry for her, but I didn't. She had made her choices. She had gambled everything we had, and she lost. That wasn't my burden to carry. The divorce was finalized in record time. The moment I signed the papers, I felt an odd sense of relief, as if I had finally put the last nail in the coffin of the life we had shared. There was no anger anymore, no lingering bitterness, just a quiet acceptance that it was over, that I had survived, that I had won. One evening, I sat on the back porch with a glass of whiskey, watching the sun dip below the horizon. I thought about everything that had happened, about how quickly life could change, about how someone you thought you knew could turn into a stranger overnight. But I didn't feel broken anymore. I didn't feel lost. I felt free, and that was enough.